Hello, my name is Osha. I talk about American president, and I'm continuing with my discussion of the end of anti-miscegenation laws through the passing of Loving versus Virginia. I apologize. I was doing a video and it got cut off. I guess my phone was full. I record. I use a very basic form of recording. I use my phone. Um, I had been discussing the discussion of the Warren Court in arriving at the nullification of the Virginia's anti-miscegenation laws in the Loving versus uh, Virginia case of 1967. Importantly, the court described the racial classification statutes as invidious racial discrimination that was unsupportable by the U.S. Constitution, specifically the equal protection of the laws, and that the purpose was only to maintain white supremacy. And again, it was in contradistinction, in violation of the uh, equality of citizens, which the Constitution underscored. And so that was what led to the end of anti miscegenation laws in the United States. However, uh, having a law that says that, well, anti miscegenation laws or laws banning interracial marriages and interracial sex is one thing, enforcing them is another thing. Just as we saw in the Brown versus Board of Education laws, Brown versus Board of Education ruling of 1954, which said, you know, separate but separate was not equal, and it required the desegregation or integration of public schools. It took a long time. It took over a decade for the implementation of those laws, and this was very similar in the Loving versus Virginia case. Now uh, there were significant effects from the ruling of Loving versus Virginia in 1967. Uh, I want to just quickly discuss in terms of state action, policies, how this was implemented, and I also want to talk about how um, Americans exercise their rights to intermarriages, right? How their right to intermarry, to marry any race, of their choice. So in terms of enforcement, first of all, um, many states were still there were still judges that were trying to rule in terms of the old statutes that upheld interracial um, that had anti-miscegenation laws that banned interracial marriages. But again, when a decision by the U.S. Supreme Court concerning the constitutional rights, when it's been opined, when it's been decided by the Supreme Court, it makes any law within a state that's contrary to it, that's with respect to the 14th Amendment, it makes those laws unenforceable. So all those anti-miscegenation laws in the South, if they had not been repealed, they became unenforceable. Um, and this was the case. So we see the last state that actually repealed its anti-miscegenation laws, interestingly, was Alabama, where I went to school. I'd been in Alabama in the 1990s. So while I was in Alabama, they still had on their books laws that said, no other race could intermarry with white people. So they didn't repeal the anti-miscegenation laws until 2000 in Alabama through a legislative act that proposed it's called Amendment 2, which was to ban anti concerning interracial marriage and to eliminate annul laws that prohibited interracial marriage. Now, the through a vote of over 60%, the people of Alabama, moved to repeal all anti-miscegenation laws. So in 2000, Alabama, brought its statutes, its laws in conformity um, with the ruling of Loving versus Virginia, which said in laws banning interracial marriage were unconstitutional. Now, in terms of Americans, then crossing that color line, how did it impact Americans? One of the things that I recently came across that I studied and which made me interested in doing this particular video is research from a mixed race woman called Dorothy Roberts. She's actually a professor of law. She graduated from Yale with her undergraduate magna cum laude, and then she went on to Harvard Law School, graduating with her JD. At some point, she had clerked, importantly, for Constance Baker Motley. Constance Baker Motley, of course, she's very significant in history. She's the first, she became a federal judge. She's a black female who became a federal judge. She's the first woman to first black woman to argue a case before the U.S. Supreme Court. And she's the first woman, I don't know if she remains the only woman, but she was the first woman to be borough president of Manhattan, right, in New York. Of course, I lived in Manhattan in New York for a long time, including while I was in school at Columbia University. Interestingly, she got her law degree from Columbia University as well, her undergrad from NYU, and she got her back then it was called a Bachelor of Laws, an LLB, in from Columbia University. Isn't it funny that? So you can see that education initially was not, intended for women because we still use the old system, the old nomenclature, right? So the first degree you get is a bachelor's, right? A bachelor is what you call a male who's not married, and the subsequent next higher degree is master's, right? That's what you call a man, who's still not married, right? A master, or well, a man, masters. You don't say a mistress degree. So maybe if they want to equalize and remove the sexism in degree awards, they might want to change it to spinster degree for women, and a mistress degree for females. I don't know. I haven't researched it, but just this, I just realized the sexism in the nomenclature of degree awards that still exists. So this woman, the professor, she's Dorothy E. Roberts. I read an article of hers regarding interracial relationships in Time magazine, and I researched her further and saw a number of, she's done a lot of scholarly work. She's a sociologist in addition to being a law professor. I think she's currently based at Penn, but she uses her life as being a mixed race person. She's a daughter of a white professor and a Jamaican immigrant, right? A black Jamaican immigrant. So she was born in 1956 in Illinois, in Chicago, Illinois, which interestingly had anti-miscegenation laws at the time. At one time, they banned it, their anti-miscegenation laws, I think in 1871 in Illinois. But in the 1900s, they passed new anti-miscegenation interracial laws. So it's kind of interesting. So I'm not sure where her parents married, but she was born in Chicago, Illinois in 1956, before Loving versus Virginia was passed. So I intend to do more research. And it's interesting how she discusses her interest in the work of her father. Apparently, her father had been a professor, and he met her mother while she was a student. She was his research assistant at the University of Chicago, where the father, who was an anthropologist, was working on a project interviewed over 500 people concerning interracial marriages. And it's interesting that they got to marry and they had her and her sister. And so she talks extensively about inter, you know, and she wanted to continue her father's work on interracial marriage and attitudes within, the mixed race people within the black community. So it was from her that I read of this Manasseh Club. So she talks about the Manasseh Club. Manasseh Club was founded in the 1890s, and it was supposed to be a place, a welcoming place, a safe environment for people of mixed race heritage and interracial marriages. That was what it was founded for in Chicago, right? And so she talks about the attitudes and her father. She was reading about the interviews conducted by her father. Um, you know, amongst people, members of this Manasseh Club. By the way, Manasseh, so she, it was coined after the first son of Joseph in the Bible, right? The first son of Joseph, who was of an interracial marriage, right? Because Joseph's wife, Asenath, was Egyptian, and Joseph, of course, was Jewish. Now, in America, if you notice, at least amongst the black community, Egyptian is proxy for black, right? So amongst the African American community in America, right, they view Egyptians as, because it's in Africa, they view it's proxy for black, and then Jewish people proxy for white, right? Most Jewish people are, uh, at least of Ashkenazi, even they're not Ashkenazi, they normally are classified as white, right? So the Manasseh Club. Um, they coined their name. They got their name after the interracial uh, uh, marriage. The child of the interracial marriage of Joseph in the Bible and his Egyptian wife. And interestingly, though, I don't know how it was significant to the club if they because I'm also a Bible student, right? A Bible student. I remember that when Jacob was blessing the children, he had crossed his arms, right, and he'd placed the right hand on over Ephraim the younger, and the left over the older Manasseh. Manasseh was the first. This is significant because the right hand is like the blessing hand, which is actually consistent with my traditional Yoruba people as well. The right hand is supposed to be the blessing, the hand to bless, the good hand. So when Joseph had wanted to correct his father Jacob, Jacob said he knew what he was doing because the younger was supposed to be greater than the older. The younger was Ephraim, right? Ephraim, and he was supposed to be greater than Manasseh, the first, the older. So it's kind of interesting. I don't know who if there's that ranking in terms of blessing, if there's supposed to be, because Manasseh was going to be subservient to the younger brother Ephraim. So I don't know if in the nomenclature of that Manasseh club, if the founders considered the mixed race children to be they were going to be subservient to some people. I don't know. But interestingly, though, Dorothy Roberts pointed out uh, there's still an insidious, invidious, um, discriminatory undercurrent within the Manasseh Club, within the black community. Because remember, the racial classification in America was based on hypodescent, the one drop rule. Everybody was, anybody who had black ancestry, African ancestry, was deemed black. Remember from Thomas Jefferson himself, the mixed race children he had from his unlawful intercourse with his slave Sally Hemings. They were not his, they were still considered black. They were still his part of his slave holding, right? The children, his children, right, that came from him in the interracial cohabitation with Sally Hemings were considered slaves as well. They were considered black, right, not white. Um, However, Dorothy Roberts noted the attitudes of the people in the mixed race people in the Manasseh Club, right? They considered that they promoted ideas that the mixed race children were better than the colored people, were superior to black people. So this is what she wrote off. That the mixed race people cultivated and promoted notions that the mixed race children, even though they were considered black in American society, that the mixed race children it was promoted that they should consider themselves superior to black people who weren't mixed in America. That was one. And then the other thing was they seem to they seem to beatify or canonize a certain type of interracial marriage, right? They beatified the interracial marriage where there was the male was black and the white person was female. The white person was a female, right? So they canonized the ideal interracial marriage as being that of between a black man and a white woman, and they frowned on the um, interracial marriage between a black woman and a white man. This is according to Dorothy E. Roberts from the investigations of her father, her white father, who conducted a study on interracial couples in the 1930s, right? Started in the 1930s and it was his life work. Um, for some reason, it was claimed that the white women in the club sneered at instances when a black woman married a white man, and that they claimed that black women didn't want these uh, to be in interracial marriages with white men. Now, of course, I've done earlier videos talking about the paramour rights of white men, even during the era of slavery and Jim Crow, which had anti-miscegenation laws, right? While the men were not supposed to claim the children or to marry the black women they had sexual intercourse with, it was still understood that it was common that they had intercourse with black women. That's white men had intercourse with white women, right? Sorry, white men had intercourse with black men, and it was not the other way around. Interestingly, the case that went all the way to the Supreme Court that eventually invalidated anti-miscegenation laws, that's Loving versus Virginia, the community in which they grew up, right, Central Point in Caroline County in Virginia, was known for its mixed race population and mixed race, interracial intercourse, right? So again, through the paramour rights, white men did have intercourse with black women, but they were not supposed to claim their children as the offspring from the intercourse as their children. And then the other thing is they were not supposed to intermarry openly with the black women. Now, Loving, right, on the other hand, was violating that law because he traveled all the way to DC and married, you know, Mildred Loving. He married her and brought her back to Virginia, and that's when they were arrested and convicted. So I don't know if that's why the Manasseh Club had that negative attitude about black women being intermarried with white men, right? It wasn't, again, the canonized, the beatified form of interracial marriage in the Manasseh Club, which promoted interracial marriage, right, was actually between a black man and a white woman. So yeah, and there was one instance that a white woman was claiming that they were the one, that it's white women and black men that were the oppressed and the slaves in the whole in the prohibition against the stigma of interracial marriage, right? So that's another reason why they canonized the coupling of a black man and a white woman. According to this Manasseh Club, right? The Manasseh Club, which was supposed to be a safe haven and for people of interracial marriages and children of mixed race marriages. Now, in terms of, so I will do more research and study her works. That's um, Dorothy Roberts. Again, she was born in 1956 in Chicago, Illinois, when um, there was there were anti-miscegenation laws at the time that existed on the books. I guess in terms of enforcement, maybe things were different. Her father's name was Robert Roberts. I think he was a professor again, and anthropologist. Her mother wasn't able to finish her PhD program because because of marriage and childbirth, and uh, she stopped to take care of the children. But it's interesting that the daughter Dorothy Roberts went on to have she's had a stellar career. I think she's about 69 years old. She's a recipient of the Genius Grant, the MacArthur Genius Grant, which Chimamanda Adichie herself is known to have won, which is the MacArthur Genius Grants. They give them a substantial amount of money. I think it used to be over $650,000. Sometimes they increase it so they can conduct research on their work, and they basically, so it's one of the most, it's like the Nobel Prize for Americans, right? For America. So she's distinguished herself. Now, in terms of the statistics, in terms of the demographics of people in America who have gone on um, to marry since anti-miscegenation laws were struck down, we see that the U.S. Census Bureau records that in 1960, only 0.4% of Americans, married couples in America, were interracial marriages, right? Only 0.4%. So that was negligible, almost non-existent, right? So the rare people were the Obamas. 1960, Barack Obama was born in 1961 in Honolulu. Interestingly, right, he was born in Hawaii. I don't know if it was Honolulu, but in Hawaii. Interestingly, the region in America that has the highest rate of interracial marriage is Honolulu, Hawaii, at 42%, right? So almost half of the people who get married are of different races, right? So Honolulu, Hawaii has 42% interracial marriage in America, right? Currently, which uh, it never had anti-miscegenation laws, by the way. That's why Barack Obama, his parents, the Kenyan black man, Barack Obama Sr., was able to marry Barack Obama's mother, Stanley Ann Dunham. Of course, they'd been classmates, gone to the University of Hawaii together. That was where they met. Um, in terms of the rest of, the statistics, data from uh, other places, generally, again, the data went from 0.4%, which is negligible, right? Trace amount 0.4% in 1960 to about 2% of the U.S. population in 1980 were interracial marriages. That's according to the U.S. Census Bureau. Another statistics, Pew Research claims that it was as much as 7% of the U.S. population in 1980. But this number jumped in 20 across the board. The data gatherers, research centers are consistent that by 2020, 2025, that the percentage of interracial marriages in America is roughly about 19%, right? It's about 19% today. So that's a significant jump, right? 19% of newlyweds in America are, interracial marriages. Now, in terms of specific uh, races, again, race is an arbitrary social construct, or we can say ethnicity, ethnic groups, and interracial marriage. Whites are still the lowest in terms of intermarrying out, 11%. Next are Black Americans, 18%. So 18% of Black Americans have interracial marriages. The highest group that intermarries in America is Chinese Americans, right? Sorry, not Chinese, Asian Americans. Asian Americans at 29%. The next highest is Hispanic Americans, right? Hispanics at 27%. Now, in terms of within the Asian American population, though, the women are over twice as likely to marry out of their race than the men, right? So the demographic uh, uh, con- that is that intermarries out of their race is Asian American women. So that's the highest demographic involved in interracial marriages in America. Uh, in terms of black people, it turns out black men today are over twice as likely to marry out of their race than black women, right? And within the black population today, in fact, it's about 19% of black people um, are, are in interracial marriages, or at least newlyweds, because that number changes. Again, it's still constant that around 85% of black people are married to black people as well. Yeah, African Americans marry of married people, about 85% of them. It's significantly though, the number of while black men are more likely, twice as likely to marry out of their race than black women, that number increases significantly when the black men have at least a bachelor's degree. For bachelor's degree holders, the number jumps to 21% of them marrying out of their race. I've seen a study, an old study, that says almost half, when their income actually is over, and then which uses income, that if their income's over like 100K, six figure, over half of them are likely to marry out of their race. Now, again, my cousins in America, I have male cousins. All my male cousins are married to white women, which is interesting. All my married male cousins in America are married to white women, which is, they're highly educated. They're married to white women. So that is kind of interesting. I'm not trying to embarrass members of my family or my cousins, but I noticed that Dorothy E. Roberts, as a scholar, she uses herself, her family as a case study, right? And so, hey, I guess I'm not naming who it is. I guess, I'm not saying who it is which of my cousins. I'm just saying that, okay, I've observed that my male cousins who are married in America are all married to white women. That's just something that I've observed. Um, so it's interesting that that's the data. That's the data as it stands today. Interracial marriages, still constitute just about 19%, but that's a huge, significant jump from 0.4% in 1960 before Loving versus Virginia to about 19%, almost 20% today. That's a huge, huge jump. Again, and these interracial marriages are more likely to occur in metro areas, like metropolitan areas in big cities in America, than in non-metro areas. I'm going to stop this video here, and I'm Olurotimi Osha, and I talk about American presidents. Of course, we've had a mixed race president, whom we call black due to the one drop rule and the hypo descent culture of America. That's President Barack Obama, our 44th president. So it is relevant that I discuss interracial relationships in America. I'll look more into Dorothy E. Roberts' research, because what she was discussing was very important. It's very interesting about the intra-racial and discriminatory attitudes within the black community vis-a-vis mixed race versus non-mixed race people within the black community in America. And she observed this through the Manasseh Club and their attitudes. Again, I remember in the Manasseh Club, it appears that the interracial marriage that they beatified or canonized was that between a black man and a white woman, while they sort of demonized, or at least they discredited the motives, or the desirability of an interracial marriage between a black woman and a white man. I'll stop here and I'll keep you posted. Thank you.